The lead up to Resident Evil Village had me immensely excited. I had become a rabid fan of the series after finishing the remake of RE2 and then shortly after playing Resident Evil 4 for the first time. And that was a game that opened my eyes in terms of linear level design in gaming, in that it aligned the player through like a multitude of elusive environments, and each of those individually effective from their own ominous sounds, monsters, and subsequent playstyles to run through. And I eventually began to appreciate the variety of monsters that populate Resident Evil from a series perspective, from the game-consuming, and rightfully so, Mr. X, to the horrifyingly sparse ones scattered amongst the games. The original tank control-infused terror operates off of limited choices, forcing the player to make tough choices, but then elevating that with perpetually resilient enemies, making the mansions appear larger and larger, eventually leading to a sense of progression. Hell, the map is probably the hardest enemy in any Resident Evil leading up to 4, even though Resident Evil 3 fell short of both expectations and a typical expected runtime for a $60 game. The centerfold of Nemesis that was promised in the promotional material saw a pretty great presence in the game itself, overwhelming, looming, causing you to look over your shoulder. It's great because the Mr. X and Nemesis type god villains are almost like impenetrable archetypes for what most of the game is. You just want to avoid the ever-living hell out of them. And for what it's worth, it was a lot of fun and allowed the game's plot to operate around the villain encounters without ever feeling intrusive of that story, and it just kind of felt right. And I say this with apprehension because we just got Resident Evil Village from Capcom, and the cartoonishly tall Lady Dimitrescu catapulted her way up the internet's relevancy board and cemented herself as the would-be de facto villain to represent Village. And Capcom must have known they struck gold with her because she kind of overtook the centerpiece of Resident Evil Village's marketing. Hell, I saw TikTok ads from the official Resident Evil account featuring, you guessed it, Lady Dimitrescu, but when I got to finishing the game, I found a slight similarity to a piece of media that I just kinda despise. Resident Evil Village takes a roll call approach to its antagonists, 4 lords leading up to one final villain, Miranda. The idea of having 4 main villains surrounded by one central one is just a massive headache to kind of think about, but the game treated the balance well, but underneath it all, I never understood the purpose of what Miranda meant. Why she was the centerfold of these 4 monsters. Yes, I understand the plot significance for it and the build-up to Miranda. It's just that this build-up led to an event that I did not find myself invested in whatsoever. Emblematic scenery, sound design, and gameplay that made the other 4 sections and previous games so good was just kinda lost in this mishmash of darkness and dwindling ammo. And keep in mind that I really enjoy my time with this game. It's beautiful, cinematic, coupled with consuming environments and a juggling contest of fun gameplay styles, almost like a roller coaster. I'm not disappointed in the game either in the slightest. Storytelling, characterization has never been Resident Evil's strong suit, nor has it ever really been its purpose, making the disconnection of purpose between the villains essentially the Achilles heel of the game for me. A thorn in the bush, but man, does it stand out. And this only other piece of media that I was mentioning that I could draw a similar distinction from was that of The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Somehow Sony hasn't wiped this one from my mind yet.
I am just a figment of your imagination.
The villain gauntlet present in the second Andrew Garfield Spider-Man film is about as messy as you can get. Rhino, Electro, Green Goblin, and even some corporate suits from Oscorp gang representing the opposition in similarly overbloated fashion. The balancing between these characters was just about as imbalanced as you'd expect in a 2.5-hour long film, with it so obviously wanting Green Goblin to get his time on the screen as much as they do Electro. And for The Amazing Spider-Man 2, it was clear that the villains are crammed in for promotional value as they were in the commercials for the film. Toys, t-shirts, video games, any kind of profitable branding that spawns from having at least 3 villains instead of 1. Sony paid the price for this though, as The Amazing Spider-Man 2's shittiness seemed pretty transparent at Sony, who instead cracked a deal with Marvel and, the rest is history. But for Resident Evil, it still feels like a plot inconvenience that the writers piled upon themselves. Having 5 villains, 1 main and 4 secondary, I guess, it's just a lot to throw at a player, and especially in a game that throws you in as many environments as there are villains, in which I completed in just over 8 hours. Look, the common issue between Sony's Forgotten Child and Village seems to lie within misconstrued marketing. Both pieces of media promised a lot of one thing, but ended up giving us a mixing bowl of it all. For Village, this didn't prove to be a pitfall of bombastic proportions like it was for Spider-Man, but the disappointment of leaving the castle so early on eventually diminished as I was thrown into a new space full of, that characteristic scenery I was talking about, and some chilling foreshadowing actually to what might await me, awaiting something that I was excited for. Yet the only foreshadowing that Spider-Man translated was that of a much-needed change that proved successful, and I'm glad it did. Give the audiences what they want, but to mislead them through marketing trends and gimmicks can prove to be damaging. A commodified relationship between creator and consumer will diminish when trust is in jeopardy. Look, I just found this common ground between these two seemingly separate pieces of big budget media to be pretty interesting, and I'm gonna keep doing stuff like this, so stay tuned. Let me know what you think of this comparison. Does it make sense to you? Am I too far up my own ass? Let me know. Thanks for watching.